Well, good morning. Welcome to the Deep 404. There's some very interesting speculation starting to circulate that things are happening and something big is coming in the Ukraine conflict. The Ukraine offensive is stalling around Robotyne. In Robotyne, yesterday, the Russians have reclaimed territory that they had previously lost to the Ukrainians. Not only have they reclaimed some of the south of Robotyne settlement, but they have been able to capture areas just to the east and west of Robotyne, capture that land back. And the areas they've captured back there include solid trenches. So this is allowing the Russians to now be able to defend the flanks of the area of southern Robotyne that they have just captured. Now, I'm not claiming this is a great advance, but it does mean that the Ukrainian push in Robotyne, which is a very important one for them, is stalling and is not proceeding well, and it's chewing up many resources as they go along. We've got video confirmation now of strikers, the US 8-wheeled armored fighting vehicles, confirmed losses of them in fields now having been destroyed. And Weeb Union, if you haven't watched Weeb Union on YouTube, please do. Amazing, really good analysis. I'll put a link to Weeb's channel here in the description. He has been keeping since the Ukrainian offensive started in June, he has been keeping a visual tally of the visually confirmed Leopard tank losses, Leopard 2s. His total includes ones which are clearly destroyed, those are damaged, and those which may appear to have been abandoned. And his count is now at 31, with 2 more visually confirmed in Robotyne in the last day or so. Now, that's Robotyne. In the Vremevky ledge, in Staromoyorsk and Uroghine, to the east of the Robotyne area. I'll just go to the map here because this will be useful to just use the map here just to show some of this. These areas, let's just zoom in a little bit here. Here we have Robotyne. Now, Robotyne south of Tokmacha and Kharkiv, and heading, I think, 20 kilometers away from Tokmak. And then if we just zoom out a little bit, over here we have Staromoyorsk and Uroghine. Now, these are key. These 2 areas are key to the Ukrainian attempts to capture Crimea and cut off the land bridge. By getting from Robotyne down to Tokmak here, we can see there's a central hub for roadways down to Melitopol, down to the left, and then or the west, and down to the right to Berdyansk. So while the Robotyne area is stalling, Staromoyorsk and Uroghine, there is still Ukrainian heavy fighting and pushing going on there. And the plan here would to be somehow to get down to perhaps support the Robotyne forces to be able to get to Tokmak and then assume some control over these roadways. We also have these reports just recently of the evacuations in the north. Now, I've spoken of the evacuations around the Kupyansk area here on this Liman Kupyansk line, this 90-kilometer line along which the Russians have been reinforcing, and they've been slowly putting pressure on the Ukrainians, so much so that the Ukrainians have been moving brigades from Bakhmut, the Donetsk area, southern Donetsk regions, moving some of them up to try to defend around Kupyansk. And we have talk of up to 60, nearly 70 settlements around this area being evacuated, 11,000 people or more, and reports of the administration of Kupyansk perhaps also evacuating. Then yesterday we had reports that there is a new wave of evacuations along this line here, along the border uh, of the northern Kharkiv region with Belgorod. Now, along this line here, if we do zoom in, there is, as you can see, there is a line of townships along the border, and they are all being evacuated. Now, this is a different type of evacuation, it seems. This is more a defensive one, preparing for something here. The evacuations around Kupyansk have been clearly due to the clear and present threat of the Russian push westward and the expectation that these areas may fall to the Russians, and the Russians will move this red line across to the Oskol River here. Now, we've had reports for some time now that Wagner have been up in the Belarus region, strengthening their reserves. So this is the Russian border along with Belarus here. Evgeny PRigozhin has, and I will talk more about this in another video, maybe later today, maybe tonight, but Evgeny has popped up again, this time in Africa. However, his Wagner forces left behind in Belarus have been recruiting in this area. We've seen videos of them holding open days, attempting to recruit Belarusian volunteers to join them. That apparently has been ongoing and continuing. There have been images reportedly of the Wagner campsite, and the campsite has been growing in size. So they certainly seem to be successful in reinforcing, growing their numbers, and perhaps picking up volunteers. Now, where am I going with all of this? The big news yesterday is Russian reporting that Russian General Surovikin, who has been the commander-in-chief of the Aerospace forces, has been deposed, that he's been removed from his role here. Now, Ukrainian reporting is seeing this as a major victory, perhaps suggesting that he was corruptly involved with Evgeny PRigozhin in the attempted coup, if you will. Not that it was really a coup attempt, but insurrection or spat, whatever it may have been. So there's some talk in the Ukrainian channels of Western media that he has been ousted because of that, and that this is a sign of the weakening of Putin's power in Russia. I think it may be something else. I think what we might be seeing here is preparations for the Russian offensive. General Sirovikin, the Sirovikin defensive line has been named after him. Now, this is the defensive line through the south of Zaporozhye and southern Donetsk, the area which the Ukrainian offensive has not yet been able to reach, these heavily fortified Russian defensive lines. He's known to be a defensive general, and by all accounts, his defense, particularly given in the Krasny Liman up to Kupyansk area, where the defensive line has now become a unexpected offensive line, his operations as a defensive general have been successful. So he's being replaced by Viktor Avzalov, who is head of the main staff of the Air Force, who will be assuming his role. And what I think is perhaps more likely here is that General Surovikin is perhaps being relieved of his role in the defensive capacity, because strategically Russia is now moving into an offensive position, and they will look to another general to control and command their offensive forces over the coming months. Where General Surovikin will end up, I don't know. There's lots of speculation. People speculating he may get involved in Africa somehow if that's required and defences are required there. I don't know. More will come on that. But, and again, I need to credit Weeb Union here with what I'll talk about next. But what may be happening here, you'll notice there's, for those of you who've been watching the channel, there's some new lines on the map here, which I'll just talk through. This is speculation as to what the big thing may be, what it may look like, and how the Russians may engineer this offensive. So Wagner play a part in this. At the time of the insurrection with Evgeny PRigozhin making the the run towards Moscow with his Wagner forces, and then nothing really coming of it, and suddenly the Wagner forces being sent to Belarus, and it looked like Evgeny had been ostracized and exiled to Belarus. That was quickly shot down as being the case after we got flight logs of his private jet doing repeated trips to St. Petersburg and Moscow and Minsk and all over the place. And now we see he's clearly still engaged in leading Wagner in Africa. But those Wagner forces have been growing in Belarus. The Sergei Shoigu, the Minister for Defense, and other, Dmitry Peskov, the President Putin's spokesperson, amongst others, have spoken of the stealth mobilization occurring in Russia, where, if these numbers are to be believed, upwards of 10,000 volunteers per week have been joining and signing contracts with the Ministry of Defense in Russia, which has led to somewhere around 250,000 new contracts being signed between the 1st of January and the 1st of August this year. So if this is true, then the Russians have amassed a large army. They are preparing. There were talks that they were even in their own minds preparing for a larger fight than a fight with Ukraine, a fight with NATO, and in the background the industry is gearing up for that. So what might be happening here? One suggestion is that the recent success and the recent bolstering of forces by the Russians in the Kupyansk area has been not because they have felt threatened by Ukrainian forces there, but rather it has been a deceptive ploy. It has been a ploy to begin to push against Kupyansk and force the Ukrainians to defend this area. Kharkiv is an area which the Ukrainians claimed back last year from the original Russian land conquest. And it is an area which they will defend very strongly, as it would be a body blow to Ukraine to lose Kharkiv again. So pressure in this Kupyansk region, getting to the Oskol and then moving forwards logically towards Kharkiv is something which Ukraine would look to defend against. And that seems to be the case, where there are reports of them bringing brigades up from the south to here. So the Kupyansk area, the bolstering of forces by the Russians there, perhaps done to lure in additional brigades to this area here. Now, the thinking is that what might happen is that the Wagner forces will create a push down to Chernihiv here. They will come down to attack Chernihiv. Now, Chernihiv is very close to Kiev, just roughly 100 kilometers away, so not far away at all. So you can imagine that if Wagner push across the border and start to take Chernihiv, Ukraine will then be forced to perhaps roll back its offensive plans in the south. The idea of taking Crimea may stop and take a back seat, and they will roll their forces back up towards Chernihiv to bolster defenses around Kiev, as the Ukrainians would logically think that if Chernihiv is being taken by Wagner, that they would look to push down and perhaps attack Kiev next. The thinking is then that the Russians would begin a push through Sumy. This way here, they would avoid Kharkiv, avoid Kiev itself, but push through here, heading down here towards Poltava, perhaps heading down towards this area here, and then from the south, with the weakened southern defences as brigades move north to Kiev, with the strengthened Russian forces down here as those recruits, that new army that Sergei Shoigu has been forming, complete their training and become ready to fight, move in, that a push would be made up past Zaporozhye, past Dnipro, perhaps even skirting these, not attempting to take these cities, but skirting them and getting the Russians into a position where they have now formed a line joining or pincering in towards Poltava here, coming up from the south and coming down from Sumy to the north, and then effectively cutting off all Ukrainian forces in this area here, with the strong Kupyansk, Krasny Liman forces bolstering the east, with this evacuation which has just occurred across the Kharkiv top line here, with a strengthening of Russian forces there, and then Russian forces pushing in through Sumy down to Poltava and pushing up past and skirting Zaporozhye and Dnipro to join here, and then being able to attack Ukrainian forces within this area here, effectively encircling what elements of the Ukrainian army are there. A split of Russian forces would then continue upwards here, heading up the Dnieper River, using the Dnieper on their left and flank as a natural barrier, and come up and begin to put pressure on Kiev. Now, if pressure comes onto Kiev, this takes pressure off the Wagner forces here, and so now you have the Wagner forces from the north and Russian forces coming up from the south to either attack and attempt to take Kiev, perhaps, or at least surround it on one side, put pressure upon it, and then southern forces make a move across here and take Odessa. And at that stage, without necessarily having to fight for Kharkiv, Dnipro, or Zaporozhye, or even Kiev, Russia is then in a position where it has laid claim effectively to everywhere east of the Dnieper, River, no doubt touching the Dnieper River where they want to, and probably ultimately in negotiations assuming some control over the Dnieper River, perhaps in concession for not then fully, not warring through Zaporozhye, Dnipro, Kiev and Kharkiv. I don't know. Those details will come out. But this is what is being suggested as may happen. And so the big news today of Surovikin losing his role, I think there is something behind that, and I think the concept of him being a defensive general, having done his job in a defensive role, and Russia now moving to a offensive position. Again, this corroborates reporting from earlier this week that Vladimir Putin traveled down to Rostov-on-Don in the south of Russia, which is where the Russian military high command is for the special military operation, and met with Gerasimov there. And again, speculation was that he was doing that because they were starting to plan or starting to discuss the coming Russian offensive. Anyhow, look, that's enough for this morning. I'll try and get another one tonight if I can. If you're enjoying the channel, I'm really happy. I'm getting some good feedback on the comments and things, and people enjoying the channel, which is great. If you haven't subscribed already, please do, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.